Hey guys, Lumen02. I'm going to continue doing a series of deck techs on some different creative lines in the 100 card Singleton format in order to try to generate more interest in an increased range of viewership that I've been getting from the old school 93, 94 community for undercard, because I think there's a lot of similarities between the two formats, and I think generally speaking both formats offer what is most viable, or the most viable metas in all of Magic, such that you can pretty much play whatever you'd like, and generally speaking it's pretty good. So I just recently got done wrapping up a White Weenie 100 card Singleton deck tech and then some gameplay. What I'd do now is kind of change gears and go to a deck that I call Cheaters Prosper, but which is basically a 5-color Reanimator combo deck. It's fairly all in, but it does have some control elements to it. I haven't separated this deck by curve, but rather by function. The mana base is exceedingly robust. It is actually quite large. It's a 39 mana deck with 4 additional cards that serve to provide mana to the deck. And some of these don't actually provide mana, so technically I think it's actually like a 37 land deck, because Bazaar of Baghdad and Dark Depths do not count, but are both components that enable the combinations of the deck. So realistically, it's, let's call it a 42 mana source deck, is what it would realistically be. That said, I'll go into this first pile here of mana. You have Deathrite Shaman, which can serve for more than mana, but typically speaking, that's how it's going to be enabling, is to help fix your colors. Because we're a fairly landed deck, typically speaking, this deck does not have to worry about getting mana screwed. It's actually a very high tutor count deck, and actually it does not need a lot of mana to win. It just needs the right mana depending on the cards you're holding to win. Also, Birds of Paradise. I think Noble Hierarch is probably better than Birds of Paradise, but Birds of Paradise is just perfect for mana, and since we're not really... This deck uses the combat step to win, but it doesn't really use the combat step to attritionally win. It uses it to win through cards like Emrakul or Blightsteel Colossus. Then you have Mox Diamond and Chrome Mox, because this deck wants to generally surprise or, force... or lull an opponent into a false sense of security based on, standard mana development. Typically speaking, cards like these or like Ancient Tomb can generally surprise an opponent where, like a control deck tries to land, let's say a Search for Azcanta on turn 2, and you just go Ancient Tomb, drop Sneak Attack, go. Or drop Sneak Attack, drop Chrome Mox, activate Sneak Attack, Blightsteel Colossus, I win the game. And your opponent's like, well, damn it, I could have just held up, my counterspell or my mana drain or whatever, and, won this game. So the deck has a lot of the fast mana for surprise value more than anything. It basically forces your opponent to play around singletons in your deck, and if they don't, sometimes you can just punish them with them. So I think it's very powerful to have those kind of cards. Going into this next pile, this is the Disruption package of the deck. Swords to Plowshares is included just because it is a very high power level card, and the opponent's life total does not really matter. So generally speaking, you're going to save this card for lock components like, Containment Priest, I'm trying to think of the other, the Fox Samurai, Samurai the Pale Curtain, stuff like that. Firestorm. In a Reanimator style deck, which is what this is, Firestorm is just a bomb. You can get rid of a bunch of dead cards in your hand, ditch an Emrakul to the graveyard, kill their most relevant threat, and the way the deck can work is it uses cards like Corpse Dance, Shallow Grave, and Goryo's Vengeance, which are instant speed reanimation effects to, let's say Firestorm to blow out some creatures, and then reanimated instant speed and Emrakul swing in, destroy all of their permanents, or force them to sack all their permanents and hit them for 15 life, which is generally speaking going to be game over at that point. And if you can't do that, you can just set it up by, ditching a Jin-Gitaxias or a Gristlebrand or some worthless other cards, because there's a lot of dead cards in these style of combo decks with Firestorm, just to buy yourself the time you need. Thoughtseize. So this deck does not run Permission. It runs solely Discard because of its efficiency. Thoughtseize, Inquisition, Cabal Therapy, which actually combines very well with Academy Rector right here to find the Omniscience package. Which is why it's actually in here. Collective Brutality, just a very powerful card. For some reason, Duress is not showing main. I must have boarded that. But, looking at the deck list, and we may just make a modification right now, I think, actually, I do not like Phyrexian Arena anymore. This is a deck that I haven't touched in a while. I think I actually like Duress significantly better in this deck list than I do Phyrexian Arena, a more attritional card. Well, we just screwed that up. We're going to go card by card, I guess, then. I'm not going to have it separated by effect anymore. I have a habitual tendency to sort by mana cost when I'm looking at these decks. So going down the one pile, you'll see an extensive amount of tutors. Enlightened Tutor, your most common thing you'll find with this is going to be your sneak attack. Sometimes you'll end up finding Sylvan Library if you just need to grind cards against a control deck. Sometimes you'll find Animate Dead. And there are even times where you'll find Omniscience and then just use Show and Tell to put Omniscience into play. So the card actually represents a lot of flexibility in the deck. Brainstorm, all the power cantrips. So Brainstorm, Ponder, Preordain, I won't go very far into them. Also, right now, the deck's playing Thought Scour. I'm trying it out. It could easily be Mental Misstep, but the reason I like Thought Scour right now is actually for the same reason I would play Mental Misstep, because I can actually mill my opponent with it, and Mystical Tutor and the top tutors have become a lot more popular, and I think having that ability to do that, plus have a synergistic effect with the deck I'm playing, which is ditching cards in the graveyard, so I can reanimate them at instant speed or at standard sorcery speed, is quite powerful. Entomb, a very high power level tutor, especially in a deck that is trying to run cards like Shallow Grave, Goryo's Vengeance, Apprentice Necromancer, etc. So there's a lot of ways to reanimate fat. We don't have a ton of fat in the deck, we just have the best of it, that I consider the best of it, to include Jin-Gitaxias, Emrakul of the Aeon's Torn, Primeval Titan, and Gristlebrand. We also have Blightsteel, but Blightsteel is really only a combination with Omniscience, Show and Tell, Through the Breach, and Sneak Attack. You can't actually reanimate it. Now, Emrakul is a card that typically defies reanimation, but there are a few ways that you can do it in the game of Magic. A couple of them include Loyal Retainers, which is a card that's currently on retainer for the deck, no pun intended. Corpse Dance, which is a buyback spell that eventually you sack it to, but you can actually do this on your opponent's turn during their end step, which is quite powerful because if they do counter it, if they're a counterspell deck, then essentially you can get 2 turns worth of mana against their 1 turn worth of mana, which is pretty powerful. Additionally, Goryo's Vengeance and Shallow Grave can do the same thing for the Emrakul. So there's essentially 4 ways to reanimate it out of the graveyard, not to mention Sneak Attack, Through the Breach it, Show and Tell it, or hard cast it with Omniscience off of Academy Rector. Academy Rector is another engine in the deck, and if your opponent lands something like Containment Priest, oftentimes you'll just get Academy Rector on the board and then find a way to kill it. There's a lot of ways to kill it. You can use your Collective Brutality to kill your own card. You can use Diabolic Intent to sack it to tutor for another card. My best guess would probably be an Emrakul. Or you can Cabal Therapy them on the backswing, sacrificing it to actually also find the Omniscience. Omniscience can also be put into play through Show and Tell, and I believe on a couple occasions I have hard cast it. Continuing down through the one pile, you have Faithless Looting, generally speaking a pretty low power level card, but it's an effect similar to Careful Study that I think you want to have in decks like this because of the high dead card count and the amount of combination cards. In a lot of ways it's like playing almost 2-card Monty, but I think it's a little better than that deck. You want to be able to just filter them off. And or, ditch your fat back so you can reanimate it with one of your 2 to 3 mana instant speed reanimation effects. Crop Rotation, exceedingly powerful tutor that can find you the Dark Depths combo, can find you Bizarre Bag Deck, can just find you Wasteland if you need to get rid of something. Very powerful effect, just an awesome tutor. Worldly Tutor, typically speaking, just finds you one of your creatures that you need to put in your hand to either discard from your hand or to cast off of Omniscience. Jace Vryn's Prodigy, very high synergy card with the deck, allows you to recast, rebuy your spells. Typically speaking, this deck does not exude a high preponderance of card advantage. It tends to burn through its cards really fast and then utilize cards like Wheel of Fortune or Jin-Gitaxias or Gristlebrand to redraw its hand, to replenish itself, if you will. So it's very easy to run out of cards in this deck very quickly, and having a card like Jace Vryn's Prodigy that which 1 gets rid of the cards that you don't need, and 2 buy back the spells that you want out of your graveyard is very relevant. Animate Dead and Apprentice Necromancer. Actually, Apprentice Necromancer is another instant speed way to reanimate something, as well as this package. You have 5 ways to instant speed reanimate. But obviously it's an onboard trick, as is Loyal Retainers. But Loyal Retainers does not matter with haste, or it basically has haste to sacrifice to find or to get the legend back in. Collective Brutality, just a powerful discard spell, and can do a few other things in this deck. One, it can kill your own Academy Rector if you need to, and the other piece of it is it can just buy you a bunch of time. Like, I have oftentimes just escalated this thing for 3, or for 2 rather, just to get a sorcery, to get some pertinent counter magic to kill their most relevant creature, and then also just to gain some life and buy time. And also ditch cards that I'd rather have in my graveyard, like Primeval Titan or Crystal Brand, so I can reanimate them and do some significant damage to my opponent. Exhume, generally speaking, our cards are going to be better in our graveyard than our opponents. Tainted Pact. You'll note this is a completely basic-less deck. So, Tainted Pact can find whatever you want in the deck if what you need is exactly one card. Oftentimes it can be a little tricky because there are cards you just can't exile if you want to win. So, Tainted Pact does have some drawbacks on it. But if you have, like, parts of a 2-card or 3-card combo, generally speaking, you don't have to worry about what you exile. You can just find the other piece and get after it. Hermit Druid's an interesting card in this deck, and it could possibly move to board and bring life from the loam in. So, like I said, I have no basic lands, so what Hermit Druid is a combination with is Loyal Retainers. It also lets you cycle the deck, so if your opponent tries to exile your graveyard, you can actually activate Hermit Druid to ditch the whole library, including the Emrakul, and then cycle the whole library back in, so your opponent, wastes their resources trying to blow your graveyard up, and you just put all your cards back in your deck, which is pretty powerful. It may be that I want to run one basic, but right now I kind of like this effect. It also actually works very well with Goryo's Vengeance, Shallow Grave, Apprentice Necromancer, and Corpse Dance, as these are all instant speed reanimation effects. So when you activate this thing, your whole graveyard will go into, or your whole library will go into the graveyard. And if what you want to do is get Emrakul, you can do that. If you want to get Gristlebrand to draw, you can do that, or Jin-Gitaxias. But your whole graveyard will then reshuffle and become your library again afterwards. So the card actually is just, it's a kind of a conditional combo piece. Sylvan Library, just a very powerful effect to get after cards in the control matchups, and tends to smooth out draws in a deck, like I said, that has a lot of endemically dead cards. Time of Need just finds you any of your bomb creatures that you may need. I believe this only finds a creature, the legendary creature card, not a legendary card. Abrupt Decay, just very great universal interaction. Grimflayer, this card could possibly go away. It's very powerful if it doesn't get interacted with. And I'm kind of like leaving it in there as a nod to the fact that I am playing Diabolic Intent, and I want to have enough creatures, which I'm already low on, to activate Diabolic Intent whenever I may need to. Aldamri's Call also finds a legendary creature card or just a standard creature card, so you can get after your opponent and win the game. I think I failed to mention Demonic Tutor, but there's not much needs to be said there. It just finds whatever you need. Frantic Search, oftentimes, like I said, you're going to want to get rid of cards in this deck and just cycle and get deeper in the library to find specific pieces or tutors. And, it's a fairly low cost to lose a card off Frantic Search if it gets you 2 cards deeper for essentially free. Intuition, just a beating because you can put any 3 creature cards in your graveyard and reanimate them. Reanimate whichever one you may want, and or find numerous combo pieces such as like Goryo's Vengeance, Shallow Grave, or Corpse Dance that basically all do the same thing, and you can get after reanimating one of your large creatures. Show and Tell. Sometimes you will show and tell in a big creature, but typically I think the best line with show and tells, or the best lines with show and tell, generally all involve Omniscience. Omniscience is far more beatable than any of these creature cards. And if you can land it, typically speaking, your opponent's not going to expect that you're running it because it's not a commonly seen card in this format. And if you have ways to creature tutor, we just covered a bunch, then you can just find the Emrakul, essentially hard cast the Emrakul because it costs 0 once you have Omniscience in play, and get the extra turn. And if you can't win with an extra turn in a 15-15 Annihilator 6, then you probably weren't winning that game anyways. That's fair. Like, you probably deserve to lose that if you can't win from that position. Thirst for Knowledge, not a card that sees a ton of play in Hunter card, but I think a card that synergizes very well with this deck. Getting to discard in this deck is very important, as is getting to dig deep, and drawing 3 cards and even having to discard 2 of those just to draw 1 card to replace Thirst for Knowledge is quite potent. At instant speed, you're not really beating that. Toxic Deluge, creature decks are pretty big, so I think you want effects like this. This one complements Firestorm as well as Nahiri's Wrath, which is also another outlet for discard that can control the board against creatures. And actually, Nahiri's Wrath works against Planeswalkers as well, which is not irrelevant. Grim Tutor. You're obviously, you need tutors in this format, and sometimes if you are a deck that requires a lot of tutoring, Grim Tutor is one of the better ways to go. I mean, it's one of the ones that I think it's marginal, right? Like, I have Demonic Tutor in this deck, I have Diabolic Intent, which are probably both better, but Grim Tutor is still fine. Liliana the Veil, this deck wants to discard often. It wants to draw cards out of the opponent, especially if they're an interactive like control deck, and it's also not bad versus creature decks. It's better probably versus mid-range, though. Wheel of Fortune, like I said, this deck does not often exhibit good card advantage. So being able to wheel after you've expended your hand in resources is a very powerful effect in a deck like this. Dak Faden, I don't know, kind of getting more marginal. He may or may not come out. This card right here, though, just essentially allows you to filter through your deck. Sometimes the -2 is relevant, but oftentimes you're just looking at this thing as a recurring loot effect in order to get into what you need and what's relevant. Academy Rector, one of the most busted cards in the deck. This card is essentially a one-lady show to get Omniscience, and once you get Omniscience, you generally always win, unless they somehow have an artifact enchantment removal spell. Factor Fiction, just a very high power level draw card that also synergizes well because it puts the pile that you do not get into your graveyard, which is pretty potent. Sneak Attack, just a beast. You get this thing down, and if you draw any of these fatties, you're probably going to win. You combine that with something like Caracas, and you can Emrakul them every turn. Emrakul the opponent every turn at haste or instant speed by recurring it back into your hand. Already covered the reanimation package, the Corpse Dance, Goryo's Vengeance, Shallow Grave, and Apprentice Necromancer, and Loyal Retainers. What these all represent are instant speed ways to reanimate a card that gives this deck a lot of resilience because you're able to do a lot of end-step shenanigans against control decks, and if it works, great, and if it does not, then you do it again on your turn, and generally by then it works, if you've done enough setup and done enough discarding of their hand, etc. And you've also bided your time and just waited. Dark Petition, just a tutor. It's essentially a 2-mana tutor when you cast it. Albeit, this is a very mana-intensive deck as far as requirements go, and 3 black mana is not always the most relevant. Through the Breach, just getting 1 hit in with an Emrakul is generally enough. Blightsteel Colossus is certainly enough if it's going to connect for the full damage. But even Jin-Gitaxias and Bristlebrand are fine. Jin-Gitaxias drawing you 7 is essentially a one-sided Wheel of Fortune. Bristlebrand, same deal. Even Primeval Titan's not bad because it can get the Dark Depths combo, which is a 20/20 on the following turn. The threat package already discussed. Primeval Titan, the only non-legendary card that this deck can summon. However, I like to think this deck is fairly Caracas-proof because Gristlebrand's going to draw you 7 cards. Jin-Gitaxias, yes, he can be Gristlebranded, but if you're doing it off Omniscience, the card has Flash, so you can just flash it back in at any point in time you want to if they Caracas it. Blightsteel Colossus, also not legendary. However, the card is, generally speaking, harder to cheat into play unless you're using Through the Breach, Sneak Attack, or Omniscience, or Show and Tell, which makes him a little bit more conditional because he actually shuffles in right away. There's no trigger from him going into the graveyard like there is with Emrakul. Emrakul, also a little bit vulnerable to Caracas, but if you know they have it, either find your Wasteland or find the Omniscience, and if they're going to bounce it with Omniscience in play, then you'll just take 2 extra turns, and you'll have to cast them on your second of 3 turns to win with them. Green Sun Zenith also in the deck. That could be bad. I think there is probably some credence to cutting this card for something else, but there are some times where you just want to tutor up, a Primeval Titan, and that's still generally just good enough. As far as the sideboard goes, you have kind of the aggro creature matchup sideboard tech, which includes Elish Norn as a replacement fatty for reanimation in the deck, Virtue's Ruin just to wipe out a bunch of white cards, and then kind of Sickening Dreams for the same effect. So Sickening Dreams is basically like a much less efficient Firestorm that also does a lot of damage to you. So it's a little worse, but it's not bad. Tidespout Tyrant is a card that I also sideboard into this deck because it's a non-legendary creature card. So if Karakas is a thing that they habitually have, this card can just end games relatively fast. If you get to bounce 2 to 3 things with this, generally it's game over. You'll just get them in a tempo hole and they won't be able to win. Ulamog, the Infinite Gyro, or Gear, if you will. Just an additional way to get Annihilator in the deck. And this deck used to run a Living Wish package. It does not anymore. And it was kind of nice because if they exiled the Emrakul, you go get the Ulamog, and he's not as good as Emrakul, but he's still pretty decent. Sphinx of the Steel Wind. This card is just unbeatable for some decks. Like red-green decks just concede on the spot to this card because there's really no way they can deal with it. The anti-control package includes Beside You, which makes your non-creature spells uncounterable. Dispel, which is just a model of efficiency. Defense Grid, again, model of efficiency, and we're not looking to counter on our opponent's turn. Gainsay, similar to Dispel, just a model of efficiency and just counters any blue spell. City of Solitude stops counter magic in their tracks. Chromatic Lantern, if you get Blood Moons, you can just push this thing out after the Blood Moon, and because of the time stamping, it'll allow your lands to tap for any mana. Life from the Loam against the attritional Loam style decks, just kind of battle that, but typically speaking, you're just faster. And then a solo Nature's Claim to deal with any sort of moon effects if you need to. So that is the deck. What I call 4 are Cheaters Prosper, but is really 5-color Reanimator. Now I kind of want to show you how this monstrosity of a deck actually operates. It's pretty sweet. So we're playing against player Jackie Puppet here, who I believe is on 3 or 4 color Oath. So this initial hand is interesting. Like, my thinking is this, like, what I'm probably going to try to do, because my threat is Blightsteel Colossus. And like we were talking about, Blightsteel Colossus requires Through the Breach or Show and Tell or Sneak Attack to work. I kind of like Sneak Attack best because if I Show and Tell this thing and it gets, Swords to Plowshare or bounced, I probably just lose. So I play out my tapped land first, the Murmuring Boss, which is a tri-land. And it's fetchable of note, which, a lot of people don't play Murmuring Boss, but it's a powerful card. Opponent Demonic Tutors on turn 1, which is fairly ambitious because they don't really even know what I'm on yet. My assumption is they're probably going for Oath. I look at their hand, they did get the Oath, and they have a Latnam's Legacy, but the rest of their cards are just lands. Opponent plays out their Oath here. I don't know if they have a counterspell or not. Like, if they drew into it, oh well. I'll accept that risk. I just find the Thoughtseize here. And I actually debate casting the Thoughtseize, but I'm like, you know what, screw it. I'm just going to jam this thing because I think they're bluffing. They're actually not bluffing, and they have a Memory Lapse they top-decked after I'd seen their hand with the Collective Brutality. They gamble here, more than likely for Forbidden Orchard, which makes sense. But I redrew my Sneak Attack, and I'm on mana to actually activate it this turn, so I cast out the Sneak Attack, say, hey, buddy, good game, play out the Blightsteel, attack for 11 infect damage, and the turn before, I would likely lose to their Oath, their Burning Oath combo, or I'm sorry, their what's it called, Dragon's Breath combo, good game Oath combo. They lose to my Blightsteel, so that's game. Going to game 2, I bring in my control option, like my control package. So I have in City of Solitude, Gainsay, Dispel, that kind of stuff. Duress, which now Duress is main deck. So we remodified the deck in the middle of playing, or in the middle of doing the deck tech. I actually put that on bottom. I think I don't want one more tutor in this hand. I want more land. Is what I really want. So my opponent does have their best land in the form of Forbidden Orchard. This game actually plays out oddly, though, because it turns out they don't have a way to get after their Oath, but they do have the Forbidden Orchard. And I'm able to force them to tap their Forbidden Orchard quite a bit. I Tainted Pact here, and I believe I just find Sylvan Library. I top deck land at that point. Sylvan Library is good enough to me because it's going to force a counter, I think. And what I plan on doing here is waiting for them to tap out, and then I'll probably Frantic Search in response to get rid of some of the dead weight in my hand. I do pick up, for lack of better terms, a free 1/1 here, which is not horrible in this deck. I get rid of Through the Breach and Cathartic Reunion. Now, my game plan has kind of changed. I kind of want to figure out a way to break this Academy Rector. I do have crop rotation available to me. They try to resolve a Mystic Confluence or Mystic Remora here, and then they Intuition with Gainsay on the stack. They find Loam, Oath of Druids, and Wasteland. So I'm not going to try to go for crop rotation at this point. I kind of want to try to out-tempo them now. I figure they probably have some way to recurse the Oath in hand. They do, Regrowth. So I'm able to get Regrowth gone, and that means Oath is gone to them at this point until they can find like a Yawgmoth's Will or something like that. They try to Wasteland me here, which this is a pretty big beating. When your Wasteland gets disrupted by crop rotation off of Loam, you basically spend a whole turn drawing nothing just to try to disrupt my mana. Unfortunately, I miss here and I don't draw into my lands. I play out the Rector because I figure that if they're to blow up one of my lands, they can either blow up one of my colored sources or my Ancient Tomb, but either way, I'm going to be able to cast Collective Brutality to put down an Omniscience on the following turn. So what I end up doing is this. I get rid of my City of Solitude, which may seem kind of crazy, but I do need my mana here. Play out the Sylvan Library, expecting that it's going to get counterspelled or mana drained here. And then I kind of missequenced this. I probably should have waited to do this after the attack steps so I get one more damage. But I just go ahead and do it now because I already have the mana floating off of Ancient Tomb. And I have to. And I find the Omniscience with the Rector. They go ahead and off their mana drain mana, Factor Fiction, keep the 3 pile and get rid of their Lapse and Flooded Strand. I don't really care if they can dig. I care more about mana efficiency at this point because if their mana is less efficient, then they're going to be forced to tap the Forbidden Orchard more often. I Luck Sack into a threat, but you know, I wouldn't want to say Luck Sack. Like, if I don't draw a land, most of my cards do something broken with Omniscience. So, you know, I draw into this monstrous pile of cards here that includes a Gristlebrand and a Lightning Axe. I do go ahead and reflash in the Jin-Gitaxias near their end step so they can discard their hand. They do blow their counterspell on it, which is fair. I play the Bazaar of Baghdad first, expecting to discard a bunch of my land cards. Play out the Gristlebrand and the Hermit Druid, draw into 7. Play out the Primeval Titan, play a couple lands at Scry, keep a tutor on top, go into Ponder, find Time of Need for Emrakul of the Aeon's Torn, cast Emrakul of the Aeon's Torn, getting an extra turn, attacking in for 5, and killing my opponent, putting them to -1. I did most of the other nonsense there just to show how the deck worked, because I was telling him I was doing a video. I was going to put this on a video. Obviously, I didn't have to. I could have just attacked for 5 and won there. But this is what the deck does. It's pretty sweet. You compare this to the White Weenie deck, and you can see this is a much more high power level deck. Did I get a bit lucky getting the Jin-Gitaxias? Yes, of course. Getting a draw 7 off the top ropes was nice. But like I said, there's a lot of cards that I could have drawn there that do very powerful things if they're not lands. But even if it had been Cephalid Coliseum at that point, my chances of, after my next draw step, finding something relevant to Omniscience into is pretty high. So, this is a 5-color Reanimator, or 5-color Cheaters Prosper, as I call it. I hope you guys enjoyed the deck tech and the gameplay, and I hope that, you know, if anything, this display of what this format can be about inspires you and kind of shows more variety of decks that are available in it and what you can do with it. Because, again, I like to promote for all my viewers this format because I think it's probably one of my favorite ways to play Magic, just due to the raw range of great decks that can be played in it. And, you know, when I say this is the best deck in the format, absolutely not. I think it's very good against certain things and pretty bad against a lot of others. You know, if a deck is 25 to 30 counterspells, it'll probably beat this deck most of the time if your opponent who's playing that knows what the heck they're doing. If they don't, you know, or you just outplay them, you'll win. But it's definitely an uphill battle. Against, the Weenie style or the highly aggressive decks, I'd say it's about 50-50, honestly, because if they put a fast clock on you, it's pretty tough. Against a more diluted combo control deck, like when my opponent's playing Oath, I think it's a little more favored. You know, but I also don't think Mystic Remora is great in this format. He must have sideboarded it in. You know, and who knows? Maybe it was wrong of me to actually even fight over that with Gainsay. But as you can see, I mean, like, we're able to kind of bait him into loam recursion on Wasteland, and he realized real fast, like, hey, this is not the axis. Like, resource denial is not the axis I'm going to win on. And I was able to, you know, show that because I got Omniscience down. It's like, all right, you can blow my lands up all day long, but outside of Bazaar, Baghdad, none of them really do anything anymore. So pretty cool deck. Has a lot of interesting stuff going on in it, and can take a lot of very radical lines of play that win seemingly out of nowhere. But it is a very high setup deck. Requires a bit of practice. Is a little more challenging to play, but not like the most difficult deck in the format ever to play either. It's not 100 card Storm where sequencing it has to be like perfectly on, and you really need to play your deck a lot to know it. It's also playable for someone just wanting to pick up a deck. So I hope you guys enjoyed the deck tech. I hope if you've not tried 100 card Singleton, this this excites you enough to give it a shot and maybe pick up this list. All right, guys, enjoy and take care now.